The drums woke you before sunrise. By the time you reached the Palace of Thebes, soldiers had already blocked the gates. People slow as they pass, glance at the walls, move on. From inside, chanting, then a silence so complete the street holds its breath. Behind those walls, a 9-year-old named Tutankhamun is being handed the most powerful empire on Earth. Not the relics, not the documentaries. The living world as it breathed before history remembered only the gold. What that world actually looked like after that crown settled, you will see in the next 10 minutes. Thebes, 1332 BC. The administrative and religious capital of Egypt at the height of its power. What you are about to walk through has never existed in any museum, any textbook, or any documentary. Because until now, the technology to build it did not exist. Using AI reconstruction tools, Egyptian administrative papyri, tomb painting records, and archaeological data recovered from the Valley of the Kings and the temple complexes at Karnak, we rebuilt Tutankhamun's Egypt as it functioned on the day his reign began. If this kind of immersive history is what you come here for, subscribe and drop a comment right now. What city and country are you watching from? We read everyone. The Palace of Thebes where Tutankhamun was crowned was not a single building. It was a compound, a walled city within the city, covering an area that modern excavations suggest extended over several city blocks. The outer walls were built from mud brick, reinforced with limestone at the load-bearing points, painted white to reflect the Egyptian sun. White in this context was not a neutral choice. It was the color of purity, of divine order, of Ma'at, the Egyptian concept of cosmic balance that every pharaoh was required by theology to uphold. The walls announced what kind of place this was before you had seen anything inside them. You understood your position before you entered. The entrance gate was flanked by cedar wood flagpoles, each rising above the height of the walls. Colored pennants flew from their tops, the specific colors recorded in administrative texts as signaling an active royal residence. When the pennants flew, the palace was occupied. When they were lowered, the pharaoh had moved. This was the ancient world's equivalent of a flag over a palace signaling whether the monarch was in residence. Everyone in Thebes knew how to read it. Walk through the entrance. The transition is immediate. Outside, the street was noise and dust and the smell of the Nile at flood. Inside the outer wall, the temperature dropped. The palace compound was built around a series of garden courtyards that created their own microclimate. Shade, moisture, the specific stillness of enclosed space. Egyptian palace architecture did not separate the ruler from nature. It controlled nature and placed the ruler at its center. The first courtyard you cross was not decorative. It was a waiting space, and its design was engineered to communicate before any official spoke a word. The floor was painted in a pattern that Egyptologists call the captive nation's motif. Rows of bound prisoners from every enemy Egypt had conquered, rendered in precise pigment, covering the ground you walked on. Every visitor to this palace, foreign ambassador, Egyptian noble, military commander, crossed this floor to reach the throne room. They walked on Egypt's enemies. This was deliberate. You understood your position before you arrived. The throne room of Thebes in Tutankhamun's reign was accessed through a columned hall whose ceiling was supported by painted wooden pillars. Each pillar was covered in gold leaf on the upper third, the section that caught light from the clear story windows above. At the specific hour of the afternoon, when Tutankhamun held formal audiences, that light fell through the western windows at an angle that illuminated the gold columns and nowhere else. You entered a hall that appeared to be on fire. The throne sat at the far end, elevated on a dais of 3 steps, in relative shadow. You stood in light. The pharaoh sat in shadow. The architecture had already told you who was in control before anyone spoke. The throne itself has been recovered. It is one of the most documented objects from the ancient world. What the object tells you, sitting in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, is only part of what it communicated in this room. The throne is covered in gold, inlaid with glass, carnelian, and faience in colors that have no equivalent in modern manufacturing. The back panel shows Tutankhamun seated while his wife, Amun, applies perfumed oil to his shoulder. This image, a pharaoh depicted in a domestic moment of tenderness, was a political statement. It communicated stability, continuity, the normalcy of divine rule. A 9-year-old on a throne needed to project permanence. Every element of that object was designed to help him do it. The administrative wing of the palace sat adjacent to the throne room and was connected to it by a covered corridor. This was intentional. The mechanics of governing Egypt, tax records, agricultural reports, military dispatches, correspondence with vassal states, required proximity to power without interrupting it. Scribes worked in this wing in shifts. Egyptian administrative records from the period of Tutankhamun's reign include correspondence with governors of Nubia to the south and city-states in Canaan to the northeast. The empire in 1332 BC was not a local phenomenon. It was a bureaucratic system that extended across thousands of miles and required daily management by hundreds of trained officials. The banquet hall of the palace sat between the throne room and the residential quarters. Egyptian state banquets were not social occasions. They were liturgical performances. Every element, from the order of dishes to the seating arrangement to the music between courses, communicated specific information about power. If you sat at Tutankhamun's table, you understood you were being shown something. The question you were meant to leave with was not whether you had enjoyed the food. It was whether you understood what you had been shown. The floors during formal banquets were covered in lotus flowers and blue cornflowers, specific plants with specific ritual associations in Egyptian theology. You walked on them entering. By the end of the evening, you had pressed them into a fragrant surface that had not existed when you arrived. The transformation of the floor over the course of a state banquet was itself recorded in tomb paintings from the period, suggesting it was considered significant enough to memorialize. Something about the idea that a single event could change the surface of a room, that power was not static but accumulated through the act of being exercised, seems to have mattered to the Egyptians in a way that went beyond decoration. Walk north through the palace compound toward the temple connection. One of the architectural features of Thebes that has no parallel in the ancient world was the direct physical link between the royal palace and the temple complex at Karnak. A ceremonial road, the avenue of sphinxes, lined with sphinx statues at regular intervals, connected the palace to the temple precinct. During major religious festivals, the pharaoh walked this avenue in public procession. The road was not simply a path, it was a stage. Every step on it was a public act of governance. The pharaoh was not merely a political ruler, he was the mechanism by which the gods maintained order in the world. Walking this avenue in procession was not ceremony, it was the work. The temple complex at Karnak in 1332 BC was already ancient by Egyptian standards. Construction had begun under rulers who preceded Tutankhamun by centuries. What he inherited was not a building, but a continuously expanding religious machine, a complex of halls, sanctuaries, obelisks, and sacred lakes covering an area larger than some European medieval cities. The inner sanctuaries were off limits to everyone, except the highest priestly ranks and the pharaoh himself. What happened inside them was not witnessed and not recorded in any document available to non-priestly officials. Tutankhamun's reign is associated in modern popular knowledge almost entirely with his tomb. This is the distortion that archaeology produces when one object survives intact and everything else does not. The tomb, discovered by Howard Carter in 1922, unopened since the pharaoh's burial, contained over 5,000 objects. The condition of those objects has told us more about Egyptian material culture than almost any other single discovery. But the tomb is the end of a reign, not the substance of it. What the reign actually looked like, the daily administration, the religious ceremonies, the political decisions that his advisors managed on behalf of a child king, that is the Egypt that existed before history remembered only the gold. The reign of Tutankhamun lasted approximately 9 years. He came to power in the aftermath of the Amarna period, the religious revolution imposed by his predecessor Akhenaten, who had dismantled the traditional Egyptian pantheon and replaced it with worship of a single deity, the Aten. Tutankhamun's reign reversed this. The traditional gods were restored, temple construction resumed. The priestly class, which had lost power under Akhenaten, regained it under the new king. These were not decisions made by a 9-year-old. They were made by senior advisors, most importantly the official eye and the general Horemheb, who governed through the young pharaoh while managing the restoration of an administrative and religious system that had been deliberately dismantled by his predecessor. The palace of Thebes where this governance was conducted no longer exists in any form that is visible above ground. The site of ancient Thebes is now occupied by the modern city of Luxor. Excavations beneath and around the modern city have recovered foundations, painted plaster fragments, and administrative objects that confirm the scale of what was here. The picture being assembled is not complete. It may never be, but it is coming. Room by room, object by object, the palace is surfacing again. Not from the earth alone, but from the administrative papyri, the tomb paintings that recorded palace interiors in symbolic form, the objects buried with a king who lived inside these walls, and tools that no Egyptian scribe could have imagined being used to remember them. The crown was placed on that head in 1332 BC. The palace that witnessed it is gone. What passed through it, the decisions, the ceremonies, the daily mechanics of the most powerful state in the ancient world, that is what we are here to reconstruct. Walk through it.